This one is a head scratcher. I really don't know what to make of it. A Steam Deck Pro. Will a Steam Deck Pro move the needle? If you could get a Steam Deck that maybe had a larger screen, more memory, and was 20 to 30% better performance than a Steam Deck LCD or a Steam Deck OLED, would that mean anything to you? Would you get that? I don't know. It seems strange to me. Why? We have this leak that just came out, right? And what it shows is Aerith Plus, 20 watt, 3.8 gigahertz CPU, 1.8 gigahertz on GPU, and we push memory up to 8533 megatransfers. That is a significant increase on RAM, rather significant, to the point that I think we can actually push further than 1.8 gigahertz on the GPU. In fact, we could probably go up to like 2 gigahertz, maybe 2.1 gigahertz before we have diminishing returns on that side, because that's a significant bump in memory clock. I think 1.9 to 2 gigahertz is probably a better number for this. So that's strange. Going up to 3.8 gigahertz on the Zen 2 CPU is also a bit strange because the power curve on that is rather steep. I'm going to show you in a CPU benchmark just in a second how much power just 4 cores can use at 3.5 gigahertz right now inside the new TDP cap, which is also interesting. I'm on the latest version of SteamOS on the developer side. So that's SteamOS 3.8. And the TDP is capped to 14 watt. It's no longer 15 watt. So they lowered the TDP cap to about 14 watt. There's the massive diminishing returns at the point anyway. So better to just shave off the watt and get the power savings on the total system power side, which is now around 25.5 watt instead of 27.5 watt. So there's significant savings that have been made on the battery life side on the newer versions of SteamOS with marginal difference in performance. But when we take a look at the CPU benches in just a moment, we have to try to wrap our heads around how much power is being used at 3.5 gigahertz now. Going up to 3.8 gigahertz will go up to around 18, 20 watt. Not even, when we also include Encore, it's going to be in that space just for the CPU alone. So is this for a Steam Deck Pro? I don't know. Maybe this is for Steam Deck Pro. Maybe there's a newer model that's going to have a larger screen, or maybe it's the same one. We just have a bigger battery. We're going to need a bigger battery because we're going to be chewing up more power. And I don't think anyone's going to like a 50 watt hour battery when we're chewing around 32 watts total system power by pushing up to 20 watt. So I don't know if that's the case. If they're going to keep that same 50 watt zone, maybe they do. Maybe it's in a larger screen. I have no idea. This is very strange. Perhaps this is more for the leak that's coming out for Fremont and Deckard. Now, for Deckard, I don't see this used on Deckard because it doesn't make any sense to me. Aerith Plus is going to use more power, and if you're on a headset going up to 20 watt, you're going to be pushing around 32 watt total system power again, 30 watt total system power. So how big of a battery are you going to have on a headset? All that adds weight to a headset, which you don't want on a headset. So what are you going to do? Have a battery tether that clips to your waist? Even then, you're still looking at what, 80 watt hour, 99 watt hour that you can possibly go up to on this particular tether. That's a bit clumsy, and I don't see it because then even going up to that wattage, what are you going to get? 2.5 hours, 3 hours of battery life? That's fine on a handheld, but on a headset, when you're, going in and out of it, it becomes less attractive. I just don't see it, especially the startup time and everything else, standby life. It's odd. And I don't think it's for Deckard directly. For Fremont, if we were to say, okay, is this for a set-top box? And making a set-top box solves a lot of problems, especially thermally, right? We can have a larger device with a bigger heatsink, bigger fan that runs at lower RPMs, making it quieter. So there's things that aren't convenient for a handheld, but as a set-top box, you don't care as much if it's the size of like a Mac Mini, right? So I don't know. It kind of makes sense in that area because Valve will be able to reuse the APU that they already have, but push it to its logical end. We're going to 8533 megatransfers on RAM, which is not capable on any AMD APU at all right now. Even on Strix Halo, it caps out at 8,000 megatransfers. So Aerith Plus pushes memory further than any AMD platform can. So they have a memory controller that has been updated or something newer has been backported to Aerith Plus to achieve this, which is significant, right? Because we're pushing LPDDR5X to its maximum endpoint. So Aerith Plus as a design is the logical endpoint of what this platform can achieve. Having said that, is that attractive? Is that enough for Fremont? Is that enough for a set-top box? If you're trying to have something that is very low cost and you're going to reuse something that you already have and just pushing it to its logical end, maybe. If Fremont connects wirelessly to Deckard, which is running something as you're just streaming to it, perhaps that's enough. But it's an interesting development. We'll talk more about my ultimate findings. Let's go into taking a look at how much power the CPUs take, and we'll take a look at some game benchmarks compared to the latest version of AMD stuff, which is the HX370, compared to what Steam Deck LCD does, and see where the gap is and how much the Steam Deck Pro closes that gap. For this particular example, I just want to show you how much power can be used from the CPU alone. Now, I'm just in the Cyberpunk NAG screen, their advertisement screen, before you can even start the game. We're using around 4 watt just to display this thing, which is kind of funny. I'm going to go ahead and push a CPU bench that I have as a shell script in the background. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. And then you're going to go ahead and take a look at your top left, and you're going to see that power-wise on CPU, we're going to spike. So we're at 12.8, 13 watt, 12 watt. We're effectively using 12.5 watts to do 3.5 gigahertz on 4 core alone. That is a significant amount of power, especially because it's practically all the power that is available to you. Remember that we still have the power on core. So GPU is not really doing anything. Most of the power, 90% of the power is on CPU, and then the 10% is also for on-core inside that 14 watt scope that we have that is imposed on us now from the newer versions of SteamOS. So I just want to give you an idea of how these powers span, so you can see how much is used on the CPU side, how much is used on the GPU side, and what all that means. I'm going to take a pivot right now. We're going to go into Returnal as a game benchmark to see what the Steam Deck Pro could actually mean for us. So let's take a look at Returnal. For our first example, we're going to be taking a look at Returnal. This is a game that I often showcase because it is a very demanding GPU game. It will stress a GPU component far more than it will the CPU side of things. And it's one reason why I often like showing it, especially on APUs where we're competing for resources against 3 different components, GPU, CPU, and on-core, where GPU is going to need to get fed the most. If we take a look at your top left right now, you can see that we're using around 9 watts for the GPU alone. That can go up to 10 watt effectively if we push it to the max. That's at 1.6 gigahertz. And for the CPU side of things, you can see that we're around 2 gigahertz, and we're using around, 2.5 watts there. So that's basically what we're using, and then Encore is using the rest. What's interesting is with SteamOS 3.8 is that the default TDP cap looks like it's been lowered to a 14 watt ceiling instead of a 15 watt ceiling, meaning that we are getting a power savings. So if we take a look at total system power, around 25.5 watt. If you were to take a look at the earlier videos from myself or Gamers Nexus, you would see that that was around 27.5 watt, meaning we were getting around 85 minutes of battery life on the 40 watt hour battery from the original Steam Deck LCD. This is the Steam Deck LCD that I'm running. So there is going to be a performance difference, a slight one. It doesn't really pay to go up to 15 watt hour. I know people always want to just do it, but this is an interesting thing that SteamOS, at least the newer version of SteamOS, are doing. Now, if we were to just kind of look at this, right, and compare it to other devices, like the latest generation of games that are out right now, let's compare what SteamOS LCD does compared to the latest version of AMD, which is their HX370, their Strix point. So let's go over. So for the benchmarks, I'm going to try to unpack this as quick as possible. If we take a look at the top left here, you can see that if we zoom in Steam Deck, SteamOS 3.8, you can see that it says TDP 14.01 watts. What that means is that what I'm actually doing here is when I'm benching, I'm actually capturing how much power is being used and then averaging it out afterwards. So for sure, a SteamOS 3.8, when you do not set a TDP cap and you just do the default, it actually runs at 14 watt, like I had said earlier. Now, if we compare it to 15 watt on the GPU Mini, which is using the HX370 at 15 watt, again, going to 15 watt on the Steam Deck is not going to give us appreciable results here. There's massive diminishing returns from 14 watt to 15 watt. So don't think that this 1 watt difference is going to make that much of a difference. But if we compare the latest AMD to the Steam Deck LCD, average is around 40% better, our 1 percentile is around 48% better, and our 0.2 percentile is around 83% better. These are great results, but we do have to unpack a little bit what's going on here. On the HX370, we do have 16 CUs of RDNA 3.5. So we effectively have twice the amount of GPU than the Steam Deck LCD and a newer generation, right? And what we're able to do there is we're able to run those at lower frequency at that wide GPU to get more work done inside that same power budget. Additionally, we have Zen 5 CPUs, which are far better than Zen 2 CPUs. Now, again, we're not really leveraging that much of the CPU. We're very more GPU bound than anything. So we're going to be stressing the GPU part of this far more. But because we can get more work done with less power on Zen 5, we're also getting a benefit there. And we run at 7,500 megatransfers in terms of RAM speed. So we have a benefit there as well. How does this all equate for the Steam Deck Pro? Well, if we're only about 40% better on averages, right? And we're 50% better on one percentile and 83% better on 0.2 percentile. That's large, right? So in terms of how it feels, it's going to feel far more smooth. But again, we also have more RAM, more VRAM. So if the Steam Deck Pro has more RAM and effectively can push 20 to 30% more performance, this closes the gap significantly for what the latest is on that we can get that are very expensive handhelds. If effectively Valve can close that gap further while just reusing the same thing that they already have, that is significant, but also kind of weird at the same time. Let's take a look at Cyberpunk as our last example. Cyberpunk is another interesting game only because on the CPU side of things for Cyberpunk, it will often highlight a deficiency on the CPU side of things or even the scheduler. So if we were to look at, Linux or Windows, especially for the HX 370, we'll see a large difference there as well, even on the same platform. So Cyberpunk is one game that really stresses that component a lot. But even in this scenario, you can see that we're still largely GPU focused. We're still giving most of our power to the GPU. So if we were to go ahead and take a look at the benchmarks, so again, we can see right here that SteamOS 3.8 on the Steam Deck LCD, we're using around 14.11 watts. So it is using less power by around 1 watt generally than it used to previously. So we do get a power savings there. And again, you're not really going to see that much of a performance difference going up 1 watt. So this is largely fine. But if we take a look at averages on the HX 370 on Bazzite, we can see that we're around 69% better on averages, 83% better on one percentile, and 87% better on 0.2 percentile. Now, this is frankly a next generation. This is a generational improvement insofar as Cyberpunk. Now, we have much better CPUs, which really Cyberpunk requires. And you can see that we didn't have that much of a gap for Returnal, where we're just really pushing on the GPU side of things. So what does the Steam Deck Pro really get us if it's only going to be about 20 to 30% better? Where does that sit as a stopgap for these newer devices? So after all of that, this still looks kind of weird, right? Like the only thing we're doing is just maxing out Aerith to its logical conclusion. Valve will be able to reuse that APU and push it to its breaking point and extract 30% more performance out of it. Maybe a little bit more if it's in Fremont where we can push all core and really start driving this thing because we don't really care about where our mains. If you can push this thing to 50 watt and go to like 2.3 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz on GPU, maybe 4 gigahertz on the CPU side, you can really push a lot of power into this and try to extract the very last bits of performance out of this package. So it makes a lot more sense in Fremont and having it be in this cost umbrella that would be technically pretty low, especially if they go into like 24 gigabytes of RAM and they're pretty strategic with what they're doing there. That gives them that 8 gigabyte VRAM allotment while still having 16 gigs for system RAM. There's lots of avenues here where they can try to min-max what they can accomplish inside that given space while not breaking the bank. And if we take a look at the bundle price of $1,200 for the Deckard unit, if the bundle is Fremont with Aerith Plus that is maxed out going to 40 or 50 watt, and then Deckard connects to Fremont or any PC, right? And Steam Controller 2. So the question is, what do you think it is? Now, for me, again, I still think this is Fremont, especially because the clocks that we see in the leak are just base clocks. And with that 8533 mega transfers on RAM, we can push the GPU significantly further to make use of that available increase in bandwidth to the tune of like maybe pushing the APU, especially going on the CPU side, maybe going up to 4 gigahertz, 4.2 gigahertz, the natural end for Zen 2 anyway. And it's not really a hard thing to achieve. But we're going to be in the neighborhood of 45, 50 watts on package to achieve those clocks. But if you're on a set-top box plugged in the mains, that's fairly low power. And in the bundle price of $1,200 with Deckard, this becomes interesting. But if you look at Fremont as the Valve first set-top box, this is less powerful than a Series S. Now, we could make up the difference by having more RAM on Fremont. So if we go to 24 gigs of RAM, we can have 8 gigs of VRAM as a starting point, and that can balloon up to 16, 20 gigs and still have room for the system RAM left over. So that would be a deciding point where it would actually, in some avenues, do better than the Series S. So it's interesting. I just don't know what they're going to price it at outside of the bundle. Because if it's $300 for the Fremont console, and it's like, on paper, half the performance of a Series S at $300, What does that make sense? All of this is interesting, and we only have surface level information to work off of. But let me know in the comments what you think this actually is. Thank you very much to my YouTube channel members, as well as my Patreon members. Your support really means the world to me. I hope this video was informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.